Hello and welcome to Manibil, and we're also welcome to next part in my deconstruction of David Hume's book, A Treatise of Human Nature from 1739. And we are dealing with book 1, part 4, section 2 in this one, or at least starting out. I might not get through this is like 1.5 hour of of audiobook, so I will split it up in possibly, something like 3 or 4 parts before I've done with it, right? But I find this, potentially at least, skepticism with regard to the senses, I find that an interesting subject. So bear with me if it will be a long while to get through this, right? I'm at part 27 or so in my series here, and I'm not even done with book 1 yet. So this is very, very long-winded in a sense. This is not your usual review or philosophical dissertation, whatever term you want to use, on a philosophical work by somebody else, right? But this is also, I'm sort of reading the book as I go along, you could say, right? I haven't read the whole book before. I've only read what I considered interesting parts within it, and the particular talking points of Hume and so on. So, but this is sort of, while I read this and try to deconstruct it, which is the only way for me to actually read it and get something out of it, I have to do it this way, right? This is the best way I can do it in order to get the best understanding I can. And you might as well get something out of it, right? And so since I have this philosophy channel on YouTube, I might as well, grind my way through this. And if you don't like it, okay, so be it. I mean, you don't have to sit through it, right? There can be long whiles where it's just read out loud and I am not commenting or anything like that, which, if you just want the audiobook, check down in the description below. There's a link to the LibriVox recording. I think that the various volumes might be of different readers or narrators. I find this one to be quite good. The LibriVox recordings can be of, let's say, very varying quality in the audio recording and the narrator's quality, so to say, right? I downloaded a log, one of John Locke's books from LibriVox, and it was an Indian, from a guy from India, right? Reading aloud with a low quality audio, and he couldn't even read the words right. He called him John Locke, right? So it's sort of, okay, that doesn't bode well, right? But, these are free public domain audio, so who am I to complain, right? I could make the recording myself. So I'm not complaining, but just so that you know that there can be varying qualities. And when we get to book 2 and 3, which is one volume in this LibriVox recording, it might be a different narrator that has a different quality and so on. So we will have to take it when we get there, right? Another thing you might have noticed that I've changed the icon on my. I'm using my Apple Music app for this reading, because when you have downloaded a whole bunch of audio files within one map, then you mark all the audio files and double click on all this. If there's 41 files, you double click on this marking. It will transfer the 41 files into one album in Apple Music, and create an icon for that with the title and the artist and so on, just like you see there. And then I just exchange the icon of the picture, and the older picture I had was sort of a drawing, something like that, of a famous painting of Hume. And I found actually that to not be sufficient. I found this other one here where there's a picture of David Hume sort of emerging from the shower or something in his younger days, right? That is much more suitable for a 29, 30-year-old boy, 29-year-old man, right? I'm pushing 57, so I'm not the youngest dude around, right? So just thinking, what was I doing when I was 27, right? 30 years ago. I mean, 27, I was partying still, right? Possibly. Doing all sorts of useless shit, right? With my older eyes, right? Hume was writing a treatise on human nature, right? 300 years ago. So it's like, um, I'm not saying that you have to write a treatise on human nature or anything to that effect or to that magnitude, but one of the problems of philosophy could be that you don't know that you need philosophy until you start philosophizing. But that's sort of a circular argument, right? It's like you need to philosophize in order to understand the importance of doing philosophy. And you might even not get it there, right? So if you're not starting on philosophy, you don't recognize that you need philosophy, if that's what you need. I would say anybody will benefit from doing some philosophy, right? So it's like you are wandering around in sort of a limbo kind of state, right? You're in a limbo state where where it's this thing of just following the herd or just doing whatever everybody else does, because you have no foundational thinking to base any of your decisions on. So you're okay, these other people do this, so I'll do the same sort of thing, right? I'm not saying there's necessarily something wrong with that, but you might wake up at some point and say, something like I did, and say, what the hell am I actually doing? Why am I doing this? Well, starts asking questions, right? And it's healthy to ask questions, right? And if you're anything like me, you will discover that you are very much an individual, you could say, right? That nobody should tell you what to think, right? Nobody should fucking tell you what to think. That's sort of a kind of skeptical approach to life, right? Yeah, nobody should tell you what you know. Nobody should boss you around, right? You can boss yourself around, right? If these people can boss me around, that must be they can think for themselves. They're so magical that not only can they boss themselves around, they can also boss me around. So what kind of philosophy are they basing this magical, fantastical structure of the being on? Well, when you ask them, they're stupid, right? Usually, this is sort of a Socratic manner. And then you find out nobody seems to know shit about fuck, right? And then you read, it's sort of this kind of rabbit hole kind of red pilling thing also, right? Okay, enough of that. Let's head into the treatise and let's hear out Hume regarding skepticism with regard to the senses. Well, that was poor choice of words for me, right? But you know where we're going, so let's go there.
Domain. Recording by George Yeager. Book 1, Part 4, Section 2 of Skepticism with Regard to the Senses. First half. Thus, the skeptic still continues to reason and believe, even though he asserts that he cannot defend his reason by reason. And by the same rule, he must assent to the principle concerning the existence of body, though he cannot pretend by any arguments of philosophy to maintain its veracity. Nature has not left this to his choice, and has doubtless esteemed it an affair of too great importance to be trusted to our uncertain reasonings and speculations.
Interesting. I would like to get a little deeper into this one, because he seems to be pointing to some kind of unconscious things going on, right? There's you're limited so far. Your abilities only go so far, right? There's you can't decide to stop your heart, for instance, right? Not by thinking alone, you could say, right? Don't do this at home, please. So there's various aspects of the functionality and the limitations uh, philosophical, meta-conscious kind of things going on that has possibly have their limitations. I mean, that's a good starting point, right? That you start out thinking, I can think my way to explain everything. It might be a little sort of, megalomaniacal, right? But I'm not saying you can't think about all that which you have access to think about and classify it very clearly. But that doesn't mean that you're necessarily dealing with every aspect of what is going on in your mind, because you might not have access to it, something like that, right? Just like, okay, if you're thinking about you can think about your cognition and your sort of, in Hume's way, you can say impressions and ideas, but that which does that, that part of your mind that thinks about this is a meta thinking, right? The philosophical part of your mind. What is sort of responsible for that? Well, you can't sort of think backwards in this way, right? You can't think your way to the, if you take Descartes and say, I think, therefore I am, right? There's this I that am. Well, what does it mean that it am, that it is, right? It's an am. It just am, right? It just is. There it is. I mean, it can't be explained any further, right? So there's some sort of the reverse level of thinking that you can't get deeper into, and that's fine. I mean, it's about being sufficiently humble about your thinking, I guess, to some extent, right? Let's dig into Hume here. The skeptic still continues to reason and believe, even though he asserts that he cannot defend his reason by reason. No, yes, I guess it's somewhat what I'm pointing to, that when you are reasoning, you're doing it in some kind of, you have a kind of a maxim about how to do it. And it's possibly based on presupposition. This is how I'm supposed to do it, sort of, right? And I can't explain why, but I don't need to. I can just decide to do it, right? As long as I don't tell everybody else, this is how you do it, god damn it, right? Rather say, well, this is how I do it, right? And I think this classification between this is how I do it and this is how everybody do it or should do it, there's a huge difference, right? Most philosophers I have listened to have this authoritarian approach where if you can't tell everybody that is how it is, then you should shut up and wait for some better philosophy to come along. No. I'm an individual. I can decide for myself however I want to think. Nobody can fucking take that away from me. And if there's any takeaway generally from me that I would want you to have, it is think for yourself, right? I can't encourage enough for you to think for yourself. And if you want to think a particular way, please do that, right? Don't stop yourself because somebody else says, oh, no, you shouldn't think like that. You shouldn't think like this. It's invalid. Okay, fuck you, right? Now, I would also encourage you to be scrutinizing your own thinking to the deepest possible depths that you can go, right? Otherwise, you will be eluding yourself, possibly, right? You will be confirmation biasing. So it's about having very, very high standards for your own thinking, right? And it's only at that point, in my opinion, you become the great philosopher, when you can do that. When you can say, I'm willing to trust my own thinking, at the same time as I'm willing to trust that I can kick myself in the ass whenever I do something that is actually not coherent, right? And in order to test whether or not it's coherent, it might be an idea trying to present your philosophy to somebody else. Not telling them, this is what it is, this is how it is. Do my philosophy. I'm Jesus of philosophy, right? No. when in presenting it, you will get some feedback. That be a good or bad feedback. That's up to you to decipher, right? But at least you are trying to present it and thereby maybe clarifying either if it's good or bad, right? Either it feels coherent, it just flows, there seems to be no holes anywhere, and or when you start to get into a sort of fluffy talking, right, and there might be some problem somewhere in your philosophy, and one way to do that is to present your philosophy. That's what you have got to work with, in my opinion, right? So you can only sort of think so far before you have to. It's something like when you are thinking about building a house, for instance, right? You can think about it and choose the tools, and read reviews of various bricks and mortar, whatever, right? Carpentry and so on. But at some point, you have to build the fucking house, right? You can't wait forever, right? And there's also this kind of philosophers and philosophy in general seems to be in this limbo state where they're just talking and talking and talking and talking and talking and making it more complex and more complex and more complex, and a new substrate under the substrate under the substrate. Meta-ethics is fucking ridiculous, scary kind of. It's trying to prove that Santa Claus exists, right? How do you go about doing that, right? By thinking, it's ridiculous, right? Okay. Defend his reason by reason. Well, no, I guess, but you can try to figure out if it's coherent and what standards you are using to figure out whether or not your philosophy is coherent. I think that Hume does a great deal of work to be coherent, at least in some respects, of some aspects. But it's that there are certain other aspects of his philosophy that is underdeveloped, in my opinion. I don't blame him. It's 300 years ago. But with my eyes, sort of 300 years later, there are various aspects that might have been more fleshed out, right? They're sort of almost taken for granted and given. That doesn't work in fundamental philosophy, right? And we are dealing with a treatise here, right? So he's setting up the bar high, and the criticism should be thorough, right? By the same time, he must assent to the principle concerning the existence of body, though he cannot pretend by any arguments of philosophy to maintain its veracity. I'm not sure what veracity that it can be verified or something like that. Okay. Nature has not left this to his choice, and has doubtless esteemed it an affair too great importance to be trusted to our uncertain reasonings and speculations. So he's sort of appealing to mental limitations if there's something that he cannot prove sufficiently. And I guess that's fair, but it might also be some kind of a get out of jail card, right? So just be aware.
We may well ask what causes induce us to believe in the existence of body. But it is in vain to ask whether there be body or not. That is a point which we must take for granted in all our reasonings.
No. Yes. Okay. This is about being strict about what you do, right? If what he's dealing with here, I might not have noticed this in the first bit, but maybe it's what he's trying to get at. And it is a regard skepticism. It's about the senses. Okay, so if I sense X and I call that a body, right? Cow, for instance, let's say. Is there a cow or isn't there a cow, right? This sort of old question. Well, it depends on what I mean, right? It's sort of a fluffy answer maybe. But he is pointing to an aspect of philosophy that I would very much like to be much more prevalent in philosophers, which is the use of axioms, right? it's this fetish with I have to argue to everything. I have to be able to argue, and otherwise I'll just find some fluffy, I can't reason my way to that, but I'll just take it for granted. Or so. No, that isn't good enough, right? Just be perfectly clear of what you do, right? And perfectly clear about the consequences of doing it that way. Don't like this fluffy, I guess we'll just jump in and do this, whatever, right? No, just say, I cannot fucking get to it, right? But I need to get to it in my philosophy, if that's what you decide. Then you have to do it this way. You have to say, I am doing it. Not because I can argue or anything like that, or I try to get some fluffy excuse or anything like that. I'm saying, I'm using an axiom. This is my fucking axiom, right? I am working with this because this is my philosophy, right? I'm just stating the axiom. When I experience X, I treat it as Y, right? If I experience body, I consider it an outside thing, right? Something like that. Fine. There it is. It doesn't need to be more complicated than that, right? I mean, it is a bit more complicated if you actually later find out that you could argue for it. Then you need to present that argumentation that leads from A to B or whatever it is, fine? But in this case where you can't get to it as far as Hume is concerned, then you just say, okay, I'm working with it, right? I have to get to the next step of my thinking here, right? So I'm creating an axiom. So, and maybe I'm a little hard on Hume here, right? But he actually, between the lines, appeals to an axiom, right? Without stating it. I would just like him to state, okay, axiom number 5, whatever, right? I'm working from this, done, right? It doesn't have to be, if you don't like my axiom, fine. Don't go to your own philosophy, right?
The subject, then, of our present inquiry is concerning the causes which induce us to believe in the existence of body. And my reasonings on this head I shall begin with a distinction which at first sight may seem superfluous, but which will contribute very much to the perfect understanding of what follows. We ought to examine apart those two questions which are commonly confounded together. That is, why we attribute a continued existence to objects even when they are not present to the senses, and why we suppose them to have an existence distinct from the mind and perception. Under this last head, I comprehend their situation as well as relations, their external position, as well as the independence of their existence and operation. These two questions concerning the continued and distinct existence of body are intimately connected together. For if the objects of our senses continue to exist even when they are not perceived, their existence is, of course, independent of and distinct from the perception, and vice versa. If their existence be independent of the perception and distinct from it, they must continue to exist even though they be not perceived. But though the decision of the one question decides the other, yet that we may the more easily discover the principles of human nature from whence the decision arises, we shall carry along with us this distinction and shall consider whether it be the senses, reason, or the imagination that produces the opinion of a continued or of a distinct existence. These are the only questions that are intelligible on the present subject. For as to the notion of external existence when taken for something specially different from our perceptions, see Part 2, Section 6, we have already shown its absurdity.
I'll maybe check out this last one. These are the only questions that are intelligible on the present subject, for as to the notion of external existence, when taken for something specially different from our perceptions, we have already shown its absurdity. Yes, so what he's saying that what he is, this is sort of the fluffy part. I haven't exactly settled that Hume is a materialist, but he seems to be more a materialist than something different from a materialist, that sort of recognizes the contradiction or the paradox in saying that my experience is also an existence outside. What is it about that experience that makes me say it is something that is outside my experience? Because that's contradictory. You can't both say it's an experience and something outside my experience. How do you get to do that, right? So, but it's the default setting of human understanding, right? That your experiences is an outside. But at the same time, you say my experiences is inside my mind, right? Inside my head. But how can it then be something outside if it's inside my head, right? What am I doing here? What is this then, right? This can't be outside if it's inside, right? You can't be two places at once. If you think that, I'm not buying it, right? You can't both point to it and say it's in here and it's also outside in the same go. It can't be both, right? So if it's outside, how do I get to it? Is there nothing in here then, right? That makes no sense. Because then it's sort of an outside where there isn't an inside. So there's an inside where there's nothing or something like that. That sounds crazy, right? But if it's inside, I can't say it's outside then, right? So this, what I call outside, is also an inside then. Or it's just an experience. And all of a sudden that inside-outside dichotomy disappears. There is just your experiences, right? There's just the human nature, right? And he's alluding a bit to it, I would say, right? But he's not sufficiently clear about it, right? And maybe that was because there weren't really any hardcore idealists maybe at the time, maybe except Berkeley, right? Which apparently Hume was also aware of. So he's aware of the problem, so to say. So I would have liked him to be a little more hardcore on this point, because it is foundational to the idea of this external existence. For as to the notion of external existence, when taken for something specially different from our perceptions, we have shown its absurdity. So it cannot be different from our perceptions. So then he's basically saying that he's refuting materialism, right? In the way we understand materialism nowadays. So this sort of an important point, this one, I would say. There was something else I thought I might like to comment on. I forgot. So let's carry on.
To begin with the senses, it is evident these faculties are incapable of giving rise to the notion of the continued existence of their objects after they no longer appear to the senses. For that is a contradiction in terms, and supposes that the senses continue to operate even after they have ceased all manner of operation.
Yes. This is, I love it. I love this sort of strictness of Hume. You can have it both ways, right? Either you say, I'm an empiricist and I need empiricism in order to have any access to anything, right? I have to have impressions. Otherwise, there are neither impressions nor ideas, right? I might have ideas in my head, right? And that's sort of the building of memories and use of memories to fill out the holes. But a memory is not empiricism. And he is very clear on this now, right? And I like that very, 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 very. I can't tell you how much I like that, right? And it's not about what I like, but I'm expressing that this is good philosophy, right? This is good and skeptical philosophy, that you can't just fill in the holes with your memory as if it's the same as experience. You can, if you experience a tree, look at that tree, so to say, then you turn around, then you don't experience tree. Then your reality, as I pointed to earlier, is that which is built from your memories that tells you, I would go with that there still is a tree. But that's not the same as saying you know there is a tree, right? That's the difference. It's maybe similar to that old thing. If a tree falls in the woods and you're not there, does it make a sound, right? Well, I would say, well, how do you know there's a tree, right? Which is actually the correct answer, and I think Hume would agree, right? How do the fuck do you know there's a tree? How do you know it's falling if you're not there, right? It's a stupid question. It's sort of like this trolley problem manipulation, right? Okay, carry on.
These faculties, therefore, if they have any influence in the present case, must produce the opinion of a distinct, not of a continued existence, and in order to that, must present their impressions either as images and representations or as these very distinct and external existences. That our senses offer not their impressions as the images of something distinct or independent and external is evident, because they convey to us nothing but a single perception, and never give us the least intimation of anything beyond. A single perception can never produce the idea of a double existence, but by some inference either of the reason or imagination. When the mind looks farther than what immediately appears to it, its conclusions can never be put to the account of the senses, and it certainly looks farther when from a single perception it infers a double existence and supposes the relations of resemblance and causation betwixt them.
I'm not particularly fond of the term double existence because that I don't. Maybe I'm misunderstanding what he's trying to say. But you know, if there's a tree and then I turn around, then there's an imagined tree, right, or a memory of a tree. I turn around, see the same tree in the same place in the same complete construction as it was the first time. And then I turn around and there's no tree and I imagine tree, and so I could keep doing this for a while, right? The tree is probably not going anywhere. So I'm filling out the holes that the tree, when I turn around, I see a tree again, and then I see, okay, while I was turned around, the tree must have been there. Fine, I would go with that, but you cannot upgrade it to the same level of insight as you have when you are actually experiencing the tree. And you might argue this way, because if you didn't turn around again, right, you didn't have that confirmation using knowledge about it being there still, right? It was because you had that higher quality of insight, it enabled you to say the tree was probably there, right, while I was looking away. If you didn't, it would be more fluffy. You wouldn't have the same safety in your claim, right? I'm not saying you're safe, but a same level of assurance in your claim, right? It has been 30 years since I've, or maybe 20 years or so since I saw the Eiffel Tower. Now I know there's webcams and movies and whatever where you can see the Eiffel Tower. But if you have been, if I've seen the Eiffel Tower 20 years ago, how do I know there's an Eiffel Tower? Well, I don't think anybody could steal it or demolish it, right? Or if they tried, they would take a long time or something like that, right? So from reasoning point of view, I could say it's probably still there. I mean, I would be willing to take the chance, right? But I don't know it because I'm not experiencing it, right? It's this conflation of qualified reasoning with knowledge. You shouldn't do that. And it's a great insight of Hume, this, right? You can't just fill out the blanks with reasoning. You can't reason your way to knowledge. Basically, that's what he's saying. And I'm completely in agreement with him, right?
If our senses, therefore, suggest any idea of distinct existences, they must convey the impressions as those very existences by a kind of fallacy and illusion. Upon this head, we may observe that all sensations are felt by the mind such as they really are, and that when we doubt whether they present themselves as distinct objects or as mere impressions, the difficulty is not concerning their nature, but concerning their relations and situation. Now, if the senses presented our impressions as external to and independent of ourselves, both the objects and ourselves must be obvious to our senses. Otherwise, they could not be compared by these faculties. The difficulty, then, is how far we are ourselves the objects of our senses.
This is deep stuff, right? He is sort of moving in on this paradox that is built into materialism. Now, I'm very concerned about this, so I will take this very, very delicately. If our senses therefore suggest any idea of distinct existences, an idea of a distinct existences. So it's an idea of it, right? Our senses suggest an idea. It's not right to say that it's the senses that does it, because in order for you to have an idea of senses, you need to have that idea first. The idea always comes before senses, right? In the sense that the sense is that faculty that you say is responsible, but you need to have an idea of it before you can even talk about senses. So it's very easy to get the cart before the horse here, right? Get into some kind of reverse argumentation direction, right? Where you say, okay, I have an idea of senses, therefore the senses are responsible for impressions that give me an idea. No, you can't do that, because you needed to have the idea of the senses before you can talk about them, right? Before you had any idea of them, you could say, right? So, whatever you are referring to is always an idea that is in your mind. Everything. If you talk about an existence, it cannot be these ideas, right? Because they're in your mind. Your impressions is also in your mind, to stay with Hume. So if you're talking about an existence, where is it? What is it? Yeah, but it's an elephant. Well, there's an idea. Yeah, but that's that color, But that's an impression. It's in your mind. All you're talking about is in your mind, right? So he's closing in on this problem, that people are used to construct an idea of an external reality based on those internal impressions. But then it's constructed. It's not experienced as an external. It's an interpretation of your experience. And if it's an interpretation, and I'm being ahead of Hume here, right? If it's an interpretation, it's something going on in your mind. So it's something going on in your mind that you, inside your mind, is interpreting as something outside. How do you get to do that? If all you have is something that is an experience, an idea, impression, sensation, whatever, what is it about that makes you say it's an outside, right? Well, just to cut it short, in my opinion, there is nothing about your experience that necessitates that there must be an outside. Nothing. There are colors, there are sounds, there are tastes, there's my cognitions, there's my whatever I can talk about. I'm always referring to something in my mind. You could say I'm always referring to mental stuff, right? You could say, I don't like that term, right? It starts to sound like Bernardo Castro, right? I don't like that particularly. You are referring to something that you have access to. For obvious reason, you can't refer to something that you don't have access to. And if it's something you have access to, it's your mind, right? Your mind is talking about something inside your mind, inside mind, right? And by the mere term of me using the term mind, inside, I am implying an outside. But the term inside, use of the term inside, doesn't prove that it's an outside, right? Because of this habitual thinking of an outside. So when you reject the paradox of the inside-outside problem, right? You are left with experience. And if you want to establish an outside, you need to argue very well for how you get there, right? And if there's an external existence, I mean, you cannot have direct access to it because you have your mind. And if you and it's based on this dichotomy, if you're creating an outside, okay, then it's outside your experience. Then you can't experience it, right? Even if you have established it axiomatically, which would be my approach, and saying this is what I'm going with, just as in the prior example, as saying I am working from an outside dichotomy, inside-outside dichotomy, but I only have access to the inside then. So why do I need this outside? Because I need to treat particular aspects of my experience as an outside of my experience. That's why I'm doing it. Otherwise, I wouldn't care. I would just be sort of solipsist or whatever you would call it, right? But I'm treating it as if it's an outside. And that's why why am I sitting here if there isn't an outside, right? I am implying an axiom that I'm working from, that there is an outside I'm sort of making sound towards and expecting something out there to receive it somehow, right? In the same fashion as I'm receiving impressions here. And interpreting these impressions as language and whatever, right? So in order to make sense of what I'm doing and how I'm functioning, I have to create this external world, in my opinion. That's my philosophy. I'm not saying you have to. I'm saying I have to, right? Please take notice. So these are sort of my thoughts around these topics. So I think this is extremely important to settle this. And you have to be very, very skeptical about what you do and not jump into, yeah, of course it follows, like Bernardo Kastrup does, right? Which is ridiculous, right? And I've done a lot of deconstruction of him recently that really points out I mean, Hume hasn't even got to a discussion like this if he gets to it, though he is sort of closing in now, right? He has written hundreds of pages, while somebody like Bernardo Kastrup just says, of course it follows. I've done it. I'm just saying, of course. So I'm a philosopher, right? I mean, I'm not buying that. He has to come up with something that is infinitely better than that, right? Okay, let's hear Hume.
It is certain there is no question in philosophy more abstruse than that concerning identity, and the nature...
Am I a little behind here? Yeah, maybe I should read it. If I since therefore suggest any idea of distinct existence, they must convey the impressions as those very existences by a kind of fallacy and illusion. Yeah, I think that's what it means when you turn around and there's no tree, you infer the tree from your memories, right? Upon this head we may observe that all sensations are felt by the mind, yes, such as they really are. Well, you don't have any comparison, right? But so, upon this head we may observe that all sensations are felt by such as they are. Well, they are what they are. You can't say I should have this experience. So you have nothing to compare it to. You can just say I have this experience, right? A fox may turn into a beagle when you're walking in the woods, right? You can't know, right? You have no a priori or posteriori insight. You only have your direct experience, and you know what are you going to do with it, right? You can't double check it. You don't have a library of what there's no story that you have to compare yourself to, say, oh, I should experience this or I shouldn't experience that. You can't do that, right? I mean, please enlighten me if you think you can, right? And that whether they present themselves as distinct object, but present themselves, but nothing is presenting itself. There's nothing outside of, I can't get to whether or not something outside presenting itself to me, like this benevolent demon, the Cartesian demon, sitting out there say, you should know this, you should know that, you should know this, you should know that, right? No, it's a violation of understanding, right? He's stepping outside himself, saying, yeah, my impressions in here was also out there, and now they are being presented to me. No, you can't do that, Hume, right? As mere impression, the difficulty is not concerning their nature, but concerning their relations and situation. I'm not sure I understand that. Okay, now if the senses presented our impressions as external too, but how can you do it? They can be external too. Now, okay, I mean maybe a little geared up here, right? So relax, Manibeel. Now, if the senses presented our impressions as external to and independent of ourselves, both the objects and ourselves must be obvious to our senses. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That's the problem. He's closing in on the paradox. Otherwise, they could not be compared by these faculties. No, exactly. I was a little ahead of myself. He nails it. Yeah. The difficulty then is how far we are ourselves the objects of our senses. Yeah, that's what. Yes, this is important. This is very important. He's closing in, right? He's not completely there yet, in my opinion, but he seems to be very concerned about this particular fertile ground for creating a paradox, right? Okay.
Nature of the uniting principle.
Yeah, so he said, it is certain there is no question in philosophy more abstruse than that concerning identity and the nature of the uniting principle,
Which constitutes a person. So far from being able by our senses merely to determine this question, we must have recourse to the most profound metaphysics to give a satisfactory answer to it. And in common life, it is evident these ideas of self and person are never very fixed nor determinate. It is absurd, therefore, to imagine the senses can ever distinguish betwixt ourselves and external objects. Add to this that every impression, external and internal, passions, affections,
you cannot have any. It is again though. Hume, man, what are you doing? Are you fucking screwing around with me? I mean, that every impression, external and internal, but you can have an external impression. It goes with the terms, mate. I mean, what are you saying here? An impression, if there's an inside-outside dichotomy, which you are appealing to the best of my understanding, otherwise I'm completely blank here, right? Then there is an outside where you say there's some objects. Okay. But whatever you're referring to is always some kind of impression or an idea. Those are a part of your mind. Right? So they can't be external. So he's saying all impressions are external then. But if they are sensations and passions and so on, I don't have external passions, right? And colors, I mean, what would that mean, right? So it's a little confusing. Maybe it's the impenetrableness of the language. I'm not sure. I don't think so, because it seems quite straightforward, right? You can't have an external. This is a contradiction. Hume, right? External impressions, that's a fucking contradiction. I'm not buying that, right?
Sensations, pains, and pleasures are originally on the same footing, and that whatever other differences we may observe among them, they appear, all of them, in their true colors as impressions or perceptions. And indeed, if we consider the matter aright, it is scarce possible it should be otherwise, nor is it conceivable that our senses should be more capable of deceiving us in the situation and relations than in the nature of our impressions. For since all actions and sensations of the mind are known to us by consciousness, they must necessarily appear in every particular what they are and be what they appear. Everything that enters the mind being in reality a perception, it is impossible anything should to feeling appear different. This were to suppose that even where we are most intimately conscious, we might be mistaken.
Oh man, I'm still confused about what he means, right? Yes, it sounds like he's saying all you have access to is your experiences, right? And if you say it sounds like it, that if it's external, it cannot be a part of your experiences, right? And you sort of take them for their face value, so to say. If you have an experience of red, there's an experience of red, you can't justify it further. That's kind of what I'm hearing, right? I might be imposing my own philosophy on him, and I'm willing to suffer that criticism, but it's still not clear to me whether or not how he approaches this dichotomy of an inside-outside, external and internal, right? He has used these terms now, so I mean, I can't decipher it any other way than he's creating a dichotomy between mind on one side and that which is outside mind on the other side, that which is the external, so to say, right? So he's not clarifying how he got to that external. That's problematic, right? Because that's another dichotomy in his ontology. I mean, it's metaphysics, right? But it is connected to his ontology, at least, because you said all these terms of sensation and so on, which is a part of his original ontology, and now he's sort of inflicting metaphysics on it. So it needs to be clear about the delineations and so on, right? And it's not particularly clear to me yet, at least.
But not to lose time in examining whether it is possible for our senses to deceive us and represent our perceptions as distinct from ourselves, that is, as external to and independent of us, let us consider whether they really do so, and whether this error proceeds from an immediate sensation or from some other causes.
I think I will leave it here because closing in on the 1 hour mark. This looks like a 4 or 5 parter of me getting through this particular section of Hume. But it is important, and I hope that comes across, that I have my own particular philosophy on this, right? And when I say that I think Hume is wrong, I don't mean it in a sense that I'm better. I'm just implying or conveying that I have a different approach to this kind of philosophy, and I try to point out where there's some philosophy that needs to be done, and where you could possibly go wrong in that philosophy according to my own standards of my own thinking, right? So I really like his philosophy. I really like it as a way, the Humean way of philosophizing. I really like it. That might be just my personal opinion, but there is some underlying approach and sort of mode of thinking that I'm very sympathetic to, right? He might not get it all, he might be a little sort of enveloped in his vocabulary to some extent, and sort of he approaches something and then steps a bit away and they say, no, stay on target, Luke, right? Uh, and it's sort of okay, yeah, we're closing in. No, keep going, man, keep going. So it's this kind of we're approaching. No. So no, but it should also be fun to do philosophy, in my opinion. It doesn't hurt, at least, right? It's not it if it's something that makes you. I mean, if you end up being pessimistic and frightful and afraid of dying, and I mean, okay, I guess you have done some philosophy, but maybe it was better if you didn't then, right? And this sort of also one of these sinkholes that is potential results of doing philosophy. You might end up in a place where you're actually in a worse mental state than you were before you started philosophizing. I guess there's also always a risk of that. But then there's something that doesn't work, right? There must be something in your philosophy that doesn't work. Because I think then if you end up being fucking depressed and pessimistic and frightful and fearful and suicidal or whatever, based on your philosophy, there's got to be something wrong, right? It's just an intuition I have, right? There's got to be something somewhere where you've gone astray. Maybe you're just trying to, you're already depressed and suicidal, and you just want to confirm that it's okay to be like that. So therefore your philosophy ended up where you wanted to go, sort of, right? So if you end up in a situation where you, as I presented before, and you sort of everything is shit and everybody's out to get you, or blah, it might be because you're just connecting the dots in the way you want, right? So see you in the next one.